6ix9ine's latest comments targeting Cenat's fan base sparked a sharp reaction online, not because he went after Kai directly, but because of what he said about the people who watch streams. The controversy began when 6ix9ine dismissed the idea that grown men genuinely follow Cenat's content, arguing that real adults with jobs aren't sitting around worried about live stream schedules. His remarks framed streamer culture as something built for kids and teenagers, immediately triggering pushback from fans who felt disrespected and mischaracterized. The statement carried weight because Cenat isn't just another internet personality. He represents a massive shift in entertainment power. His live streams pull in millions, his events dominate social platforms, and his influence reaches far beyond gaming into music, sports, and pop culture. When 6ix9ine questioned who actually watches streams, many interpreted it as an attack on the legitimacy of streaming itself. What could have been brushed off as a throwaway insult became a broader cultural argument once it went viral. 6ix9ine framed his take around masculinity and responsibility. By highlighting grown men with jobs and name-checking everyday work like warehouse and fast food employment, he implied that adulthood should look a certain way. In his view, streaming is a passive activity, something that doesn't align with grinding, hustling, or building something tangible. Rather than criticizing Kai's success, he went after the idea that watching another man entertain for hours could be considered normal adult behavior. That framing struck a nerve because it wasn't entirely new rhetoric. Older figures in hip-hop and street culture have long criticized activities seen as passive or unserious. What made this different was the target. Streaming has become one of the most dominant forms of entertainment in the world, and Cenat stands at the top of that space. Calling his audience childish wasn't just clowning fans. It was dismissing an entire ecosystem that now rivals music and television in reach. The backlash came fast. Fans immediately pointed out the irony in 6ix9ine's stance, arguing that his own career has been sustained largely by online attention and younger audiences. Critics accuse him of hypocrisy, noting that controversy, viral clips, and internet reactions have played a bigger role in his relevance than music releases in recent years. From their perspective, attacking streamer culture while benefiting from the same internet-driven dynamics made his criticism feel selective and self-serving. As the reaction snowballed, the focus shifted from Kai to 6ix9ine himself. People began questioning whether his comments reflected frustration with losing cultural influence. Streaming personalities like Kai now command attention in ways that most rappers no longer do, especially without hit records. Some saw 6ix9ine's remarks as resentment masked as moral judgment, a way to dismiss a new form of celebrity that doesn't rely on traditional music industry structures. Despite the criticism, 6ix9ine didn't walk anything back. Instead, his tone made it clear that he stood by his position. His clapback wasn't about convincing fans, but about reinforcing his worldview. He framed his comments as common sense rather than provocation, presenting himself as someone grounded in reality who doesn't understand idolizing streamers. In his mind, entertainment consumption that requires hours of attention reflects misplaced priorities, especially for adults. The divide highlighted a deeper generational and cultural split. Streaming thrives on community, shared moments, and constant interaction. Fans don't just watch. They chat, donate, react, and feel involved. For many viewers, especially working adults, streams function like background television or live radio, something to unwind with after long shifts. 6ix9ine's argument ignored that nuance, reducing all viewers to a single stereotype that made his point easy to deliver but harder to defend. Another reason the comments gained traction was because 6ix9ine aimed them at fans rather than the creator. Attacking Kai directly could have sparked a personal back and forth, but criticizing the audience widened the scope. Suddenly, anyone who enjoys streams felt included in the insult. That decision amplified engagement, dragging in people who otherwise wouldn't care about beef between a rapper and a streamer. As reactions continued, the situation became less about who was right and more about what entertainment is supposed to look like in 2025. Music no longer holds the uncontested cultural position it once did. Streamers, content creators, and live personalities now occupy the space rappers once dominated. 6ix9ine's comments reflected discomfort with that reality, whether intentional or not. By drawing a line between grown men and stream viewers, he attempted to reassert an old hierarchy that no longer fully exists. By the end of the first wave of responses, the narrative was clear. 6ix9ine wasn't just clapping back at Cenat fans, he was pushing back against a shift in power. His words expose how threatened some legacy internet figures feel as influence moves away from traditional fame models. Whether his critique was sincere or strategic, it forced a conversation about time, attention, and respect in modern culture. And as the debate stretched beyond hip-hop circles into mainstream internet discussions, it became obvious this wasn't a throwaway comment, but another flashpoint in the ongoing clash between old identity rules and new digital reality. As the discussion stretched on, the argument around 6ix9ine's comment began to split into two very different interpretations. Supporters of his stance argued that he was saying out loud what many people quietly think about modern entertainment habits. From that point of view, his criticism wasn't aimed at Cenat personally, but at the idea that streaming has replaced ambition for some viewers. They framed his words as a blunt reminder that time is limited and that endless consumption, whether it's streams, social media, or viral clips, can become a distraction from building real-world stability. On the other side, critics viewed his clapback as a clear sign of insecurity. They argued that streaming culture has surpassed music as a dominant source of youth and internet influence, and that figures like Kai have eclipsed controversial rappers who once thrived on shock value. In that context, 6ix9ine's comments sounded less like criticism and more like resentment toward a space where he no longer sets the tone. The idea that millions of grown adults choose streams for entertainment wasn't hard to believe for them, and his refusal to acknowledge that reality weakened his argument. The conversation also highlighted how definitions of masculinity have shifted. Older cultural norms framed manhood around productivity, physical presence, and external markers of hustle. Streaming disrupted the image by creating value through personality, consistency, and audience connection, rather than traditional labor or visible grinding. 6ix9ine's grown men framing relied heavily on those older markers, which resonated with some but alienated others who see no contradiction between working full-time and watching streams casually. Another layer to the debate focused on hypocrisy. Critics pointed out that 6ix9ine's own career has relied heavily on online spectacle, reaction culture, and viral outrage. His rise was powered by controversy and constant visibility across platforms, which made his dismissal of internet fandom feel selective. From their perspective, streaming audiences aren't fundamentally different from rap audiences consuming music videos, interviews, or drama clips. Both rely on attention, and both fuel the ecosystems they criticize. Despite that pushback, 6ix9ine's refusal to soften his stance kept the conversation alive. Rather than apologizing or clarifying, he doubled down through tone and attitude, signaling that he wasn't interested in approval. That posture is consistent with the identity he has maintained throughout his career, where backlash is often treated as confirmation of relevance rather than a problem to fix. Even negative reactions extend visibility, and visibility remains valuable in the digital space. As days passed, it became clear that Cenat himself didn't need to respond for the situation to evolve. His presence looms large enough that silence functions as a response. The absence of direct engagement from Kai shifted the spotlight back onto the fans and commentators debating 6ix9ine's mindset. That dynamic reinforced one of the unintended outcomes of clash. It centered 6ix9ine in perspective as reactive rather than dominant, contrasting with Kai's position as someone who doesn't need to address every provocation. The broader media conversation began tying the incident into a pattern where rappers increasingly critique streamer culture as influence migrates away from music. As streaming audiences grow older and more diverse, attempts to dismiss them as immature become harder to justify. The idea that streaming is confined to children doesn't match the data reflected in sponsorships, brand deals, and mainstream partnerships. That mismatch between perception and reality is what turns 6ix9ine's comments into a case study rather than a one-off insult. For many observers, the most revealing part of the situation wasn't the insult itself, but what it revealed about shifting power. In earlier eras, music artists dictated cultural conversations. Today, streamers often control attention cycles, collaborations, and viral moments. 6ix9ine's criticism appeared to resist that transfer of influence, clinging to a hierarchy where rap fame sits above digital content creation. The reaction showed how much that hierarchy has eroded. By the time the debate cooled, the takeaway wasn't about who won the exchange. Instead, it underscored a reality that modern entertainment no longer fits into old categories of serious versus unserious. Grown adults consume content in many forms, and streaming has become normalized as another option, not a replacement for responsibility. 6ix9ine's clapback forced that conversation into the open, exposing tensions between perception, pride, and evolving cultural habits. In the end, the situation left both sides unchanged. 6ix9ine maintained his stance without compromise, reinforcing his image as someone uninterested in adapting his worldview. Cenat's fan base continued supporting him at massive scale, unaffected by outside criticism. What lingered was a discussion itself, one that reflects a larger transition happening online. As influence continues shifting toward live digital personalities, clashes like this will keep surfacing, not because of personal animosity, but because of unresolved questions about relevance, identity, and how attention is earned in the modern era.